freedom to undertake curiosity-driven research that may have no apparent utility, but from which we know all major social, scientific, and technical innovations flow. No other institution has the license, indeed the responsibility, to pass on the value of such pursuits to the next generation so that they can become critical, creative thinkers, citizens, and leaders able to deal with our ever-changing and uncertain future. Phew. Dr. Turpin went on to argue that the universities endure because they reflect and champion fundamental democratic values of intellectual integrity, freedom of inquiry and expression, and the equal rights and dignity of all persons, and because at their best they mirror the diversity, multiplicity, and complexity of nature and society. Well, it's encouraging to hear these progressive sentiments expressed by a university president, but public universities in Canada today find themselves on the defensive, with their autonomy and their creative role in society increasingly constrained by the demands of government and industry, and the constant pressure to attend to the bottom line. Corporatization and austerity together have taken their toll. The fundamental values of the university are everywhere under threat. What I'd like to discuss this afternoon is how we might begin to reclaim the university as a public good by strengthening and highlighting its relationship to the wider community. Well, with tens of thousands of employees and budgets running into the billions of dollars, universities in Canada today are big business. And they play a significant role in local, regional, and national economies. Their connections to corporate Canada, while not always transparent, are everywhere in evidence. And perhaps not surprisingly, university boards of governors tend to be populated with corporate types whose business experience and connections are accepted as the prerequisites for effective stewardship of our institutions. But how well do the boards, as currently constituted, protect the public interest? Recent revelations concerning the University of Calgary's dealings with Enbridge, the corporate sponsor of the university's Centre for Corporate Sustainability, will at very least raise public awareness of the dangers inherent in sponsorship deals at our universities. As a result, the government may be forced to take action to tighten conflict of interest rules for university boards, which would be a useful first step in curbing corporate influence and restoring public confidence in our institutions. Canada's public universities remain heavily dependent on government funding, and their autonomy for too long has been circumscribed by government policies and priorities that reflect the neoliberal agenda. Austerity, sustainability, God, what's next? With little regard for the university's broader responsibility to serve the public interest. This has certainly been the case in Alberta, where successive provincial governments have insisted on seeing the universities primarily as drivers of economic development and diversification, and have directed funding away from basic curiosity-driven research towards short-term, commercializable, applied research projects. The short-sightedness of this policy is coming home to roost now, and one hopes the lesson will not be lost on the Alberta government, the new NDP government. Targeting funding solely to research with immediate commercial applications while failing to nurture the widest portfolio of basic research risks killing the golden goose. It is in the public interest that researchers themselves, rather than government or industry, should direct the research that goes on in our universities. The transformation of Canada's universities into large enterprises attracting millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars in research funding, has given rise to a management culture within our institutions in which success is measured according to an arbitrary set of metrics that support the elaborate ranking systems that can affect a university's reputation, but entirely fail to capture the harder to measure outcomes that are central to its mission. While universities are accountable to funding agencies, regulatory agencies, and government, accountability measures often reflect and reinforce a very narrow corporate agenda, counting, for example, the number of spin-off companies and industry partnerships, licenses and patents applied for, and publications and citations in selected scientific journals. In themselves, such metrics cannot be said to constitute an adequate gauge of the quality of a university or its impact on society, yet they have a disproportionate influence on university planning, as is evident from the University of Calgary's recent strategic plan, solely aimed at attaining a top 5 ranking among Canadian research universities and entitled Eyes High. If accountability is now a fact of life for our public universities, new metrics, a new way of measuring quality must be developed that will provide a wider range of data to support institutional planning and better measure success across all the disciplines. This would strike a blow against the dominant corporate agenda, which typically undervalues the arts and humanities. While university boards focus on funding, rankings, and new buildings, it seems that for their part, Canadians still place a high value on the teaching and research that goes on in our universities, as a recent poll conducted for Universities Canada confirms. 65% of the respondents to this poll agreed that helping students become good contributors to society is the most important function of universities, as against 35% who thought it was helping students achieve their personal economic goals. Likewise, 65% agreed that for the universities, teaching people how to adapt and learn over a lifetime is more important than teaching skills that employers are looking for now. To this degree, it would appear that the direction set by the corporate leadership of our institutions is markedly out of sync with the values of most Canadians. Above all, Canadians continue to believe in the university as a public good, and not simply as an elite skills training center or the R&D wing of private industry. And this public support constitutes a strong rebuff to neoliberal thinking, which sees value only in marketized learning. A university education can, and in most cases does, lead to a good job, and of course this remains a key consideration for students and their families. But turning out job-ready graduates is not the primary aim of the liberal arts education that our universities offer. While it continues to be valued highly, not least by employers seeking graduates with critical, analytical, and creative abilities, the liberal arts education does not set out to equip students with the skill set needed for a specific job, but rather to provide a foundation that will enable them to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Even in an increasingly tight job market, large numbers of students continue to enroll in liberal arts programs, which seek to transmit the values that define the university at its best: freedom of inquiry and expression, respect for diversity, pursuit of truth. The liberal arts education has the power to change lives, but it is currently under threat from the program prioritizers and the other managers who are attempting to devalue and undermine it. It is one of the strongest bonds linking the universities and the communities they serve, and remains one of the most potent weapons we can call on in challenging the prevailing corporate ethos of our institutions. Let me say something about the power of diversity, which Dave Turpin touched on in his speech last Monday. It's not too much to claim that the failure of the universities to promote diversity, whether on the boards, in faculty appointments, or in the student body, threatens the future development of our institutions. Diversity is, or should be, the bellwether of for any university. The search for truth, for new ways of thinking, depends on an openness to the widest possible range of different ideas, different perspectives, different histories. A lack of diversity breeds conformity and groupthink, and that surely spells death for an institution that is all about pushing back the frontiers of knowledge. I would go so far as to say that the health of our universities can be measured by their attitude to minority and marginalized groups in our society. While Alberta's universities have made some progress in this regard, the U of A's Institute for Sexual Minority Studies is an example, and Dr. Turpin's own commitment to truth and reconciliation with the Aboriginal community promises much. More needs to be done to promote inclusion and equity with a view to growing diversity on our campuses. Alberta's new Minister of Advanced Education, Laurie Sigurdsson, she might even be here, has committed to positive action in this regard, beginning at the top, with measures designed to promote more diversity in the recruitment and appointment of the public members of our university boards of governors. This is important since university boards have too often seemed to be a closed shop, with government appointing members in their comfort zone with similar backgrounds and similar limitations. A more diverse membership is bound to have an impact on the strategic thinking of the boards and will undoubtedly serve to challenge the dominant corporate management model in the running of our universities. The rise of the corporate manager has further undermined the fundamental principles of collegial governance, by which self-governing communities of scholars, in theory, are meant to exercise control over the academic priorities and curriculum of the universities. The corporatization of our institutions at the expense of collegial governance has been accompanied by the commodification or marketization of knowledge and the casualization of academic work, with increasing reliance on poorly paid part-time or sessional lecturers on short-term contracts to provide undergraduate teaching at a cut rate. The offloading of undergraduate teaching to precarious academic workers, freeing tenured professors to conduct their research, has upset the internal dynamics of our universities and raises serious questions about their priorities. Precarious academic staff do not enjoy job security or a share in collegial governance, and their exploitation as a cheaper source of academic labor casts doubt on the fundamental commitment of the universities to equity and social justice. The issues surrounding precarious academic work are complex, but addressing them would help to reestablish confidence in the universities as a progressive force in the wider community. Engagement with local, regional, national, and global communities has always been part of the mandate of Canadian universities, which can and do play a leadership role in responding to the challenges facing our communities. New ways of thinking have been generated through community-based research, while the university's community service learning, co-op, internship, and experiential learning programs have created productive and enduring relationships with NGOs, businesses, and community agencies. The work of the university is increasingly visible and accessible, and this has given community engagement a new meaning. Professors continue to undertake commissions as public intellectuals, serving on public inquiries, commissions, and reviews, providing expert comment in the media, speaking at Parkland. These activities raise the profile of the universities and foster wider public understanding of and appreciation for their potential as a progressive force for change. For about 10 years now, CAFA has been presenting an annual Distinguished Academic Award that recognizes faculty members for the research they do that's had an extraordinary impact in the wider community beyond the academy. These awards have become one of the principal tools CAFA uses to try to educate the politicians and the public about the value of the research that goes on in our universities. You say a word about internationalization. Although the world has arguably become much smaller than it was 40 years ago, when I was an undergraduate, Canadian universities have only relatively recently begun to build on new opportunities to broaden horizons and to expand the reach of their teaching and research by reaching out to the global community. Internationalization, frankly, is something of a dirty word, with connotations of exploitation. And indeed, our universities continue to exploit international students as a convenient, unregulated source of revenue, while revenue from domestic student fees remains inelastic. Satellite campuses abroad are seen as another potential source of revenue, along with overseas sales of our programs. Yet opening our universities to the wider world through more international exchanges, a new focus on the study of foreign languages and cultures, and the creation of more opportunities for Canadians to study abroad, while we attract more international students, especially graduate students, to study and work here, is essential if we're going to prepare our citizens to take up their responsibilities as citizens of the world. Quite aside from the potential here for expanding markets for our products and services, reaching out to the rest of the world is or should be a fundamental part of the mandate of Canadian universities. In this so-called age of austerity, universities have attempted to justify themselves to government, to donors, and to the taxpayers as a good investment, contributing to the building of the economy, diversifying, training highly skilled personnel for industry that will make Alberta competitive in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, and so on. As a veteran of various public advocacy campaigns promoting post-secondary education over the years, and many of the people in this room have participated in those same campaigns, I'll tell you that the messaging most often reflected in them stems from the same set of concerns. PSE as an investment in future prosperity, PSE as the foundation of the knowledge economy, PSE as the engine of economic development, PSE as the provider of skilled workers for industry. In some cases, most recently when post-secondary education was singled out for a massive funding cut by the Redford government in 2013, this line of argument seems to have been quite successful to the extent that the government was moved to restore at least part of the funding cut, though of course the restored funding was targeted to expansion of enrollment in high demand fields. But I have no doubt that for the universities, the constant appeal to the bottom line, to the potential of our institutions to drive innovation and economic diversification, was ultimately self-defeating, as it only confirmed the politicians in their narrow understanding of the value of universities in our society, and further undermined our efforts to advance a different set of priorities. The promise of economic diversification is still the quickest way to the government's heart, but we need to find more ways to educate our politicians and the public about the multiplicity of roles the universities can play in our society and the benefits that can accrue from protecting and promoting the universities as a public good. To sum up then, our universities, though through corporatization and austerity have been undermined in their ability to function as a safe space for free inquiry and expression in the public interest, nevertheless retain the trust of Canadians. The university's unique connections with the wider community can provide a solid foundation from which to challenge the narrow corporate agenda, whether by developing new ways to define success for our institutions, by embracing and foregrounding diversity on our campuses, or by creating new openings to the wider world. Thank you.